It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstein Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business industrial complex in all of its digital streaming glory. How you doing today, Steve?
I am doing very well. How about you?
Oh, not bad.
Did you have a pleasant Memorial Day weekend?
Oh, yeah, it's fine. Pretty uneventful, which was the goal.
I mean, Memorial Day weekend's always a little bit bittersweet for military types simply because we're here and you're sort of celebrating those who aren't here. And I always like to remind people, don't thank a current military person on Memorial Day. Go find a gold. If you're going to thank somebody, we appreciate it, but thank a Gold Star mother. That's what you need to think.
Right. That's Veterans Day is for the.
Yeah, that's ones. Right. That's right. Yeah. And Memorial Day are for those who passed. No, but I have a big dog here with me right now, which has been interesting. So if anybody hears barking in the background,
it's me.
It's Chris. It's not the dog. The dog's totally silent. It's Chris barking like a dog. But so I'm trying to minimize the sound here. So I've got a precarious recording situation going on here, but that's okay. That's all right.
Cutting edge podcasting setup.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely so. We here in the Hogstein studio have nothing but the most modern technology, as you well know. Or alternatively, I'm sitting in a chair in the back corner of a room with a laptop balanced on my lap. One of those two things is true.
There you go. Well, Steve, let's just jump right into it. Although, I have to say, we were having to cast our radio signals far and wide for some stories this week. We were a little bit in the dog days of sports business stories, apparently.
Yeah, I know. I wish there was, a concert to fill some time with or something, but I don't know if either one of us have anything, here right now.
Not really. Yeah. So it's a little bit.
Do you have any concerts coming up, Chris?
Nothing really of note. I did see a fantastic music documentary. Remember the band The Zombies from the 60s, British Invasion?
Vaguely, I'm not.
Their biggest hit is Time of the Season.
Oh, yeah.
Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me? Kind of a famous line from that song. Had an excellent documentary that I saw last weekend out in the theaters, which is always fun. So that was pretty cool. Actually, kind of a fascinating story in that, they were a British invasion. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for whatever that matters. But
not much, but go ahead.
But they were, I'd say maybe if you consider like Beatles, Stones, first, top tier British invasion.
Who.
Right. And then maybe second tier is like Kinks, Who, Yardbirds, right? Like you kind of
I'd put Who in the top tier person.
I just think if you it depends on whether you're going to give the Beatles, Stones their own slot. If you're not, then it's Beatles, Who, Stones, Kinks maybe, and then
you'd almost have to throw Hendrix in there, even though he's American.
Yeah, that doesn't count. For British invasion, I do realize he started his professional career in England.
Right.
But so the Zombies are in, depending how you rank them, they're 2 or 3. Classic album, Odyssey and Oracle, which is what Time of the Season is from, 1968. But it's a fascinating story because basically they broke up as Odyssey and Oracle came out, and then basically had these like kind of wild post careers, and they sort of quit as they were about to break even bigger, and then so they didn't promote the album. In fact, they had in the documentary they did this funny clip of a BBC radio interviewing, and they're like, "Well, we're breaking up," and they're like, and the radio interviewer's like, "Well, don't you think you should wait to see how the album does?" and then the album actually 2 years later, Time of the Season breaks as a massive hit in the United States. And they didn't regroup until the late 90s when there was enough of an audience. It's this fast. And then 2 of them became CBS records executives. Actually, one of them goes on to the '70s hard rock band Argent. Remember them?
I do remember Argent.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's one of the guys from the Zombies. So they had these like wild careers. It's just kind of a fascinating kind of zigzag story of like rock and roll life and posthumous success and whatnot. But they had a DJ. The time of the season was broke because this DJ in Boise, Idaho, was so obsessed with the song he was just playing it basically like 24
Over and
hours.
over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
And they would one guy was like he was selling insurance. The singer was selling insurance when Time of the Season became a number one hit in the United States in like 1969.
I don't you wonder what prompts people to make documentaries like this? It's an old band that most people wouldn't know, wouldn't recognize. They would know maybe the one song. But it's a. I mean, is he a passionate fan? Is he just looking for topics? It's just I'd love to hear what prompted the guy to make the zombies documentary.
Well, he's a Coppola for one thing, and a musician himself, so he can, in that kind of film royalty, you can kind of do whatever you want. But the zombies are, like I said, they were of some note. So
They're not Led Zeppelin though,
no, but they had more than one hit too. They weren't a one hit wonder. She's Not There, another big British Invasion song hit. But
That
then
one I don't know.
I bet you if I played it for you, you would know it. But it was kind of fascinating because then they regrouped and then they were on the road from like 99 to like 2 years ago. So it's just, it is an interesting story, but the guy's like I said, the Coppolas are actually this giant family, right? Do you know Nicolas Cage is a Coppola?
I somewhere in the back of my head, I think I knew that. Yeah.
So it's kind of massive. So the guy that made the movie, who is a musician himself and put out, a number of records. One I actually like, but it's Talia Shire's son, and Talia Adrian
From Rocky
from
fame.
Rocky, Yo Adrian, who is Francis Ford Coppola's sister.
It's such a small, incestuous little world. Isn't
Oh,
it?
the Coppolas are like they're massive. Like if you can scratch anything and get to Coppola in Hollywood, yeah. But so it's her kids, and then it's the brother of Jason Schwartzman, who's actually is also Talia Shire's son, who's actually pretty successful actor and musician himself. So when you're of that kind of like access nepo baby 3-4 generations, you can kind of make what you want.
Yeah, it's nothing that you and I could have, made on our own.
Right.
Have
Yes.
anybody actually buy it at
Yeah.
least.
For sure. So I guess that's my little rock and roll.
There you go. There's a rock and roll input for today, courtesy of Chris's documentary viewing habits.
There you go. What I was just appreciative of because nothing. I'm a big fan of the rock documentary, so I watch many of them. I hate when they don't have enough footage to actually cover, like enough archival footage or interviews or whatever, and they use animation to help tell the story. It's my number
Yeah, that's
one
no good.
rock doc. There's that ZZ Top one that they did a couple years ago. I think it was on
I haven't
HBO.
seen that one.
I mean, it's so much animation. It drove me insane.
That doesn't seem like a documentary at that point.
No, it's dumb. And it also just means you didn't have the footage. So,
Yeah, why are
had-
you making it if you don't have the
you-
footage?
right. So anyway, animation in rock docs, I'm very anti.
I
There
don't
you
blame
go.
you. I fully support that. I fully support your position, not the animated documentary.
There you go. So let's jump into it, Steve. One thing we've been talking about for years and years and years, decades and decades, not really, is private equity in sports. And the kind of final seawall to fall was when the NFL, which was just last year, maybe even within the last 12 months, approved private equity as part of ownership groups in the NFL. The rest of them were already there. And some interesting, as you start to see big capital, so to speak, start to jump in now. Two stories here that we'll kind of weave together. One, Julia Koch, which is David Koch's widow, of Koch Industries. Oh, I think they rebranded that, but Koch Industries, longtime GOP donors. Koch brothers, have been either heroes or villains in American politics for the last 25,
They're
30
but they're
years.
they're the George Soros of the right. That's what
Yeah.
I think. I say Koch brothers. I don't know if it's Koch or Koch, but
Yeah, I think it's actually Coke. Um, so she's jumping
so if
in.
you're a leftist, you don't like them, and you like Soros. If you're a conservative, you like them and not Soros. That's where this
Um,
comes out.
True. Uh, and then also Mark Cuban has actually explicitly began with a couple of partners a private equity sports investment firm, which I find like pretty fascinating. That's the focus of this investment firm. So big capital moving in, buying up little chunks, of a bunch of different sports franchises, and these purchases are pure money plays, right? This is not control. These are just buying into something for the return. We'll start with Julia Kay here, who is looking to buy into the New York Giants, correct?
Yeah. So CNBC has this story. It's investor Julia Koch looking to buy minority stake in New York Giants. Source says by Michael Ozanian, who we've quoted many
Love
times.
Ozanian.
Yeah, he's our boy. Dated May 21st, 2025. Now, the interesting thing here is that this is not a first step for her. First of all, her background is, I think she is the wife of one
David.
of the David who died, and so she inherited all of his wealth. And the Koch brothers, just I think generally are worth something like 74 billion. I believe it says
I
in here.
on Forbes it had her just her name and worth 72 billion.
Okay, then maybe right. Then maybe it's just her. So point is, she's got a
No, I
butt
mean
ton.
we don't know the other brothers. I mean I don't think they're
Right. Well, I
combined.
was
Yeah.
so in other words, I think you're right. I'm probably wrong. I had said the Koch brothers together 74. It's probably her. It's in the realm of 70 something million. So anyway, so the interesting part of this is that she's already bought a 15% stake in something called BSE Global, which was the parent company of the Brooklyn Nets, then and the New York Liberty and the Barclays Center. All of that together only had a stake of had a $6 billion valuation, which strikes me as really low considering it's the Barclays Center thrown in there. I mean, the New York Liberty wouldn't really have much value, but the Nets and the Barclays Center together, along with the house salad at the end in terms of the Liberty. So now she's trying to buy in a 15%. Let's see. Sorry, that was the 15% stake. So she's looking to buy another very small stake um into the Giants. So this is exactly what we've been talking about for weeks and what a couple months now. This is private equity. Um, this has nothing to do with management. This has everything to do with strictly financial investment. This is not political at all. I don't think Julia is overly political, as was her husband and the other Koch brother whose name I can't remember.
Well, the Koch brothers in general, or the Koch industries, or whatever, their money has actually been marginalized a little bit in the Trump era in GOP politics.
Yeah, that's fair because he's such a
Well, they didn't get along great, and so their
right.
power brokerness is diminished. And I don't mean that. I think they opt. Some of that's their choice. I'm not saying that they paying a price, but they're not nearly the big don't. They just haven't seen eye to eye with Trump. So over the last 8 to
Well, I
10
think it's
years,
dueling narcissism,
yeah.
probably built in there. It's like how you can't put two positive ends of a magnet together. That's sort of what's going on here. I don't think the president wants someone else with his or greater wealth and influence and power around. And that's probably what's going on here. But my point here is that this has nothing to do with anything politics. This is just Julia Koch trying to
Portfolio
find.
building.
Yes, that's exactly right. What do you think of the Nets plus the Liberty plus the Barclays Center at 6 billion?
I think that has everything to do with the continued second class citizenship of the Nets brand. Whether they were in New Jersey, whether they're in Brooklyn, they've gone big. They've failed on the court. They failed to capture any. Here's the thing: New York City's a Knicks town, always been a Knicks town, even when, and the Nets couldn't cut into that by moving from just across the river, because they were just across the river when they were the New Jersey Nets, and then moving into Brooklyn. You have to remember this was a time when the Knicks were horrible, for a long time, and the Nets moving, basically across the river, having some huge stars, could never cut
Still didn't
in.
matter, right?
Still didn't matter. Cannot cut into the Knicks ownership of New York City, even when the Knicks were bad. Now, the Knicks happen to be in the Eastern Finals right now, and have been good for a couple of years, and have probably one of the league's best, kind of youngish players in Brunson. So the Nets missed their opportunity to gain any kind of like mind share of New York City. So I just think that valuation has just has everything to do with the Nets just not being like, being a C-level NBA team at best, and probably the Barclays Center is probably is as important as anything in that holding.
Well, yeah, that's what I was about to suggest is, I don't remember what the valuation of the Nets was when we did the valuation story a few weeks ago, but it certainly wasn't at the top. They are, the New York market far, far better than I do, but I've always thought of them as the redheaded stepchild of New York City, probably basically. And the Barclays Center, though, now I've not been there. I would assume it's a typical new, nice, wonderful arena, 15 to 20,000 seats.
Yeah, it's a nice building, and it's got stuff going on. It's right in the center of Brooklyn. I can walk to it.
Oh, you can't. Yeah, it doesn't have the history, obviously, of Madison Square Garden. But point is, that's a couple billion all by itself, and you got to figure like the New York Liberty, in all seriousness, worth what, 300 or 400 million, maybe.
Well, they just had a valuation of. They actually, we could have done this one. Well, we are doing it. They just had a valuation done of the Liberty, which set a WNBA valuations record at 450 million.
Okay, so I was pretty close then.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, and by the way, that just tells you the disparity, in all this. What the way to really check it, if you wanted to get a sense of it, is to check the Indiana Fever valuation. I don't know what that is.
Well, it's not higher than the Liberty. Remember, Liberty are the champions, by the way, right now.
But nobody really cares, to be honest. Nobody really cares about the champion. Everybody right now cares about one player.
Yeah, but I mean, we'd have to see. But the Liberty did set the record. So as of right now, they are worth more than.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Maybe in 3 years from now, maybe check again.
Right.
Certainly. But I just think them being in New York is an automatic plus up.
But what's kind of funny is I would actually, now, not from a money standpoint, but in terms of New York City basketball attention, the Liberty got more attention, especially being the champion, than the Nets did. You know what I mean? That just, I mean, if you want to like really, like it's like if the New Yorkers are more proud of the Liberty success than they are of the Nets existing.
I think our podcast gets more attention and coverage than the New Jersey Nets, Brooklyn Nets. I mean, seriously,
and Jay-Z's not even a minority owner anymore. So
they were kind of the San Diego Chargers of the East Coast,
right? Yeah, now in LA, definitely they're the LA Chargers. So yeah, so it doesn't surprise me that those valuations were low.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to Mark Cuban here. So if you go, first of all, the story on
also
this,
CNBC.
Yeah, also CNBC. Mark Cuban launches $750 million sports-focused private equity fund by Jessica Golden. I want to say we've covered her before, but I wouldn't swear that. Yeah. Dated May 16th. So if you go back in the Wayback Machine, what, a year ago or so, Mark Cuban sold his majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks. Didn't sell all of it, and he bargained and he negotiated for himself to keep the position of president of basketball operations.
But although he must have given that up too recently, because he claimed no say in the Doncic trade.
Well, would you want to say in it?
Well, yeah, true. But and it was pretty visibly upset. So he must not have somewhere in there. He must have lost some kind of control.
If one person on our show who has more logistical capability right now, considering my situation, could maybe check the Dallas Mavericks website and see who is the president of basketball operations. That might be helpful.
I will try.
Because now we're wondering. Okay, so while Chris is doing that, um, the reason why I mentioned Cuban's background is now this private equity fund. This is something he's allowed to do now that he's no longer the majority owner of the Mavericks. He would not be allowed to do that if he was the majority owner of the Mavericks. You can't own the Mavericks and then a piece of four other teams. So his partners in this are a guy named Steve Cannon, who I'd never heard of, and Rashawn Williams, who I have heard of, who I believe is involved with the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah,
They're both kind of involved with the Falcons because the other dude is involved with an ownership group that has a Falcon stake.
Okay, there you go. So perfect. And so, according to the story here, this is not going to be focused on any necessarily particular sport, anything like that. And you said it in the beginning, right, which is that this is just solely and strictly a financial thing. This is not Cuban and his partners trying to buy another team. That's none of that. This is just finances. All right. So what do we see here, Chris?
So I'm looking at a article in what is this? CBS from June 20th of 2024. Mavericks Mark Cuban no longer has control of basketball operations.
Oh, okay. Well, so there. So he looks like he's totally out of all things management with the Mavericks. Although
he still owns 27%. That's his minority stake.
Yeah, the first story we cited said that 20. He's still got 27%, which is obviously a minority stake. So he's totally moved on from the Mavericks. I don't know if it's because of the Luka Doncic trade.
No, because this would have had this that was before. So Nico Harrison, the guy that takes all the grief for it, the team's president of basketball operations and general manager, now reports directly to Dumont after reporting to Cuban previously. And while Cuban's voice will still carry some weight in roster decisions, he may no longer have the final say on trades, draft selections, or free agency signings. And that's why when that trade did go down, Cuban made it very clear that he was not consulted in that.
And I realize this isn't a sports business story, but I don't understand that trade at all. And it's what's past is past, but it was like, are the Mavericks actively trying to make themselves a worse team? I thought
they got the magic fairy dust and what was it, the 2% or like something like sub 5% chance of winning the NBA first round draft lottery, and then they did. So some kind of karma payback.
True. I guess, yeah, because it was a really dumb trade. I mean, not that LA, Lakers made all that use of it ultimately.
Wasn't that smart to trade for the Lakers either? Ironically.
Well, I mean, theoretically, it could have been, because they got the better player out of it. But it didn't really work. At the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, so anyway, back to the story here. What we've seen here are two separate private equity, major big name private equity people getting involved, and I think this is kind of an offshoot of the NFL's willingness to allow PI. Or PE rather, private equity into this. I don't think you would see this level of interest if the NFL hadn't done what it did. And what we said before is still true. This is just boosting team valuations. In the NFL. That's why they're doing it. NFL teams are so expensive now to own and to operate. I think they have to have this kind of investment. There's a handful of people on the planet who could afford to outright buy and run NFL teams anymore. The 100%. Elon Musk of the world, and that's it. Pick your multi-gazillionaire Jeff Bezos. So they need PE to do this now, and so Cuban is a smart guy, and he knows this, and so this is his new thing. He must be tired of running a basketball team and he just wants to make money.
Yeah, it would be like being in a stock market and not being allowed to buy Apple, So, but now that you're allowed to buy Apple, you're good to go. What I find interesting is this. I think this is fascinating, and it's one thing for individual billionaires to kind of plop their money, right? That's sort of Julia Koch model. But this one, I mean, they're putting together a traditional kind of private equity firm, right? With that is going to exclusively invest in sports. So the whole construct of this private equity firm is to make investments in sports, which is the kind of the first of its kind that's going to be, and with three successful sports business investors, right? So these are people that kind of come from the field, Cuban and the other two, right? So he didn't just rope in a couple other random billionaires to fund it, right? He's got three people that have, deep bench of experience doing this, which means they're going to be able to make, kind of and do analysis and make decisions with a sharper mind towards this. They have a goal of having 92 investments in their portfolio. So
That's a lot.
that's a lot, and that means they're going to, and I would imagine they're going to be looking at things like soccer and other international, sports, because to get to 92, you have to think beyond the, kind of the American sports landscape. So they're making a very overt play here.
Yeah, I think 92 investments is along the lines of new stadium developers have a goal of getting 200 events a year in a stadium. Both are equally unlikely, but good for them. And you could almost argue that Julia Koch is not private equity in a traditional sense, really. I mean, because it's not a firm.
It's personal equity, yeah.
Right, we're calling it that, but that's not really what private equity is. What you just described, which is a firm made of a bunch of investors who have a plan, whereas Julia Koch really probably is just a personal investment,
right? Looking to diversify.
We're just kind of lumping it in there. Now what I certainly hope is that it doesn't become political, because Julia Koch herself has nothing to do with politics that I've known about. She's not involved, as was her husband and his brother. So none of this is political. I really, if I can make anything happen out of the show, it would be to get politics out of sports. So let's not even go down that road.
I don't think that'll. I mean, you could make the same case for Cuban.
You could, yeah.
So I think
he's done a pretty good job of divesting himself. He hates Donald Trump, newsflash. But none of his investments have really gone down that road.
No, but I don't think that's going to play a part here. Regardless,
I don't either.
You're talking about. I mean, you're talking about money at this level. The politics starts to wash out of it to a large degree.
Yeah, I think so.
So
get ready for more of this.
Oh yeah, and I can't wait to it'd be you check back in 2 or 3 years from now and to see what this Cuban group's portfolio looks like. Where.
Well, I mean, there's barely 92 major franchises in the top sports in the country. Okay, so if he had 92 separate sports investments, that would mean he would own. Think about it. There's 32 NFL teams. There's 30 baseball teams. Aren't there 30 basketball teams?
Yeah, you basically do 32 times 4, and you get to
right. And so that would mean he would own a piece of 75% of the American team. So you have to assume he's also talking about European soccer, probably thrown in there. But 92 is a bit ambitious.
Yeah, but also, they're going to use, they're going to, they're data driven and all this other stuff, these sort of non-emotional.
I'm just saying that's a lot of different investments and just a huge percentage of professional sports franchises.
Yeah, but I bet you they take long tail investments too. You buy a little bit into, emerging sports markets, women's sports, international
probably,
sports.
I'm sure.
Yeah, because if they can see a margin, they'll make the investment, right? They margin, you margin on your, even a bad margin on an NFL team is going to be a huge payout. Well, you might get a good margin on lesser known things, but they're just going to be looking about what their return can be.
Well, I mean, look, billionaires like this don't go into something like this without a strategy. So they're going to have a strategy wherein they'll buy in a certain number of interests in a certain number of like legacy franchises as sort of their stable investment. They're going to have some, mid-tier. They'll have some really risky stuff. That's when you're getting into like emerging markets and like,
yeah, it's going to be blue chips and penny stocks, right? It's going to be a makeup of those two kind of concepts.
Yeah. And that's what investors do.
Yeah.
That might not be what you do with your, household money or whatever, but that's what major investors do.
Right. So they'll get, they'll have a little bit of Lakers, a little bit of Cowboys, a little bit of,
South American pickleball.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So it'll be fascinating to watch. And, I think this is a good trend for sports because you'd much rather have this kind of investor group than some kind of like nameless pension fund or whatever these other kind of like where they really don't have any insights or care. So I think it could potentially be interesting. I think one thing you'd have to be worried about is like you invite it's one thing to invite some like kind of nameless investment fund, right, that's just looking to get 2, 3, 4% of things that are going to return to their fund. But and I think that they say in the article that the goal for the Cuban group is anywhere from 5 to 10% ownership range is kind of the sweet spot for them. But at the same time, if you and they said they're going to look. Another thing they say is they're going to, like any kind of investment group, they're going to look for weak ones too, right? Ones. So you'd imagine if you're kind of a middling to failing sports franchise, and suddenly Mark Cuban comes in at 10%, and then spend some time, at board meetings and looking at your books and says you guys are making a mess of this. You know, at what point does he start to gobble up more, just thinking because he can, have more influence? So, if it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Like you let a Mark Cuban and some of these other like successful sports business executives in the door. Well, what happens at look at what happens in private equity firms. They often take over or they sell it for parts. I mean, there's a downside here. Is Cuban the barbarian at the gate at some like weak franchise?
Well, yeah, it's sort of the Shark Tank of sports a little bit.
Yeah.
You move in and you take over there's some poor sap's, little like thumbtack business,
Yeah, yeah. So
kick him to the curb, which has
yeah,
happened many times on Shark Tank.
be careful what you wish for to some degree, right? Are you letting the Raiders in?
Well, I mean, he's a huge personality, media star. Yeah, I think it would take someone who's very confident to want to bring in Mark Cuban, especially Mark Cuban. These other two guys, not so much, but Cuban, you're just going to get a ton of attention. If you bring Cuban into into like the Dubuque, Iowa handball team, that's a lot. So I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. Private equity is not always great for a business. There's a lot of downsides there too.
Well, it used to be, the term private equity used to be really negative. Like if you go back, what was the movie, the Richard Gere movie, the Pretty Woman?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the character of Richard Gere, I can't remember his name, but the Richard Gere character in Pretty Woman was basically private equity investor, and he was in Los Angeles, or what was the movie in Los Angeles, whatever town they were in the movie. He was there to buy out a company and sell it for parts. That's kind of what PI was known for back then. They would swoop in, and it wasn't an angel investor. It was, we're going to destroy your company.
Right. Yeah. We decided we can make more money off this ownership by breaking it apart, destroying it, selling it off for pieces, whatever. Yeah, that's the norm.
Yeah, and that's not what people in today's world realize. Since we've been talking about, we've been talking about, and other people have been talking about it. But nobody's going to come in and destroy the Atlanta Falcons necessarily. So it's just got a different connotation. But that's what private equity traditionally was, is sort of a seek and destroy. Think Richard Gere and Pretty Woman.
But even in the NFL, there are always weak gazelles for the Lions, right?
They have taken up, guys like this have taken over franchises.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Chargers. I mean, if they, now the Spanoses have been a legendary family, but they've run that
legendary, not necessarily in a good way.
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
right. And I think they're on their third generation of ownership, maybe, or
something
definitely
like
second,
at least
minimum.
Second at a minimum.
Yeah,
yeah.
There are weak franchises even in the NFL.
Well, like you go to the Bidwells in Arizona, they're really weak.
What's going to happen now with the death of what's his face? Ursay,
Yeah, there's another one.
Yeah, his eldest daughter is taking over, and I think she's only like 44.
The guy who owns the Bengals is like 180 years old at this point, and he's got kids are involved, and same thing. Look at what like the Lakers. The Lakers somehow fell into the daughter, but they could have easily collapsed upon the death of Jerry Buss. It just didn't happen, but it could have.
Yeah,
but that's the that's a type of thing I think these guys could potentially be looking for. And if you tempt Cuban enough, I could easily see him taking this and swooping in and buying out, pick your team.
Right. Yeah. Once you got your foot in the door, right?
Yeah. And the NFL intentionally looks for these minorities. They look to the minority shareholders first when they're trying to replace an owner.
Oh yeah, for sure.
because they have
So
to be vetted still. You're not going to let like the Saudi investment fund come in here and buy a stake in the Eagles.
right,
That's
their
just
due
not going to
diligence
happen.
checks have all already been
Right.
passed.
Right.
Um, so it'll be super fascinating. This is like one of those things that's like, kind of like even on the sports business media sites that we go to find stories that we regularly hit. This one was kind of like down the chain a little bit, like, but this is one that like in 2 or 3 years, like why wasn't this a bigger, like why wasn't this a bigger deal at the time? Now it's just like a little bit of a news item nugget.
You heard it here first, kids.
Yeah. So there you
We've
go.
broken a lot of stories. To be fair to us, we've covered a lot of things ahead of their time.
That,
That became stories afterwards.
yeah, that
We
is
were
true.
first in many respects. Just we have a tiny audience. That's
Yeah.
all.
So there you go. More sort of like the amount of money we have is not enough already is the NFL is looking to well first of all we've seen I think our biggest internet we're about to have in the 2025-26 season the biggest international roster of games ever by the NFL. And Goodell is I don't know, advertising or threatening, I guess, depending on your view. At least half of the NFL games could be international games in the coming future. Which now you and I have been pretty traditionally. Well, I'd say here we'll take the L. We just bragged about ourselves. We'll take the L. We've sort of said over the years that we didn't think this was ultimately going to be anything more than a kind of a fringe thing, or that it would be kind of a I don't know a novelty, to play a couple games in London or sprinkle a couple international games. But I think we might be wrong on this one. And Goodell, now we're going to have what, 4 different countries, 5 different countries this coming year for international games. They don't seem to be slowing down, and there must be an audience.
If you want to read about this, CNBC again had the story. NFL's Goodell says the league could more than double international games in the coming years by Jessica Golden again, May 20th. I got to correct something you said. He didn't say up to
Not
half the
half, right?
games.
Double the amount current.
Yeah, he said up to 16 international games per year is what he said. Just
But
to be
that gets
clear.
close to one a week.
Yes, yes, and yeah, my point. I don't. I think your point too, but I mean, speak for yourself. But my point was that when we first started talking about this, I didn't think there was a international interest in a sport that was seen as American sport to merit that. And what I've always thought the NFL is actually doing is trying to set up a European division, because you can't really have one team in Paris, because like the logistics of that, and add it to like the NFC or AFC East or something, because the logistics of that are way too hard. You can't have teams flying transatlantic every single week, from Ohio or whatever, Maryland. And so what I always thought this was, there's a long tail here, which is more and more international games build up the market, and eventually then maybe you could have Paris, London, Berlin, Madrid, and have an international division. That's where I've not read this anywhere. It's just me speculating, but that's kind of where I've gone with this. Now the other side to that is that there was a game. Wasn't there a game in Japan, or like something in Japan this year? Am I
No.
wrong thinking that?
Yeah,
I'm
there's no
thinking of
Japan.
baseball. Forget it.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about
baseball.
baseball. But the story does mention that in 2025 there's a game in Brazil. There's games in Brazil, England, Germany, Ireland, and Spain. So the Brazil thing would go against my European League model. But I think that's ultimately where they're going. I think they want to slowly build up interest to where they're going to make money with a European League. I don't know how Brazil fits in other than it's just added bonus, but I hate the international games just because of the time personally, but I know why they're doing it. So your thoughts?
Well, one, I actually think legitimate like fan interest is higher in Latin America. And sections of Latin America. Latin America is a big place. But this is the second or third year, I think, for Brazil. Actually, in Mexico, American football is huge. So I actually think there's actually from a the fans actually care perspective. I think they're forcing Europe, and I think now they're starting to gain some traction in Europe, but that's been more of a forced exposure. Where I think they actually have more legitimate like people that actually enjoy the sport in Latin America.
Why
Which
do
I
you
think
think, is that just your personal belief, or
one, yes, yeah, I don't have any data in front of me except that I have looked up. If you look up where it's the most popular, which is Brazil is in the top five. So just in terms of fan base, where and I think there's a couple other Latin American countries in there
well,
as
Mexico
well.
isn't really Latin America, but
Well, yeah,
they've had Mexico games in Mexico City for
definitely.
longer than any other
Yeah.
international
So yeah, so south of
south of the
anything
border,
south of
right?
America, yeah, or United States, excuse me. Um, So, and I was actually shocked last time I looked up where like the top 10 markets for NFL football in terms of just fan interest are, and they're spread out pretty much Latin America and Europe. And I think Brazil was the fastest rising fan base in a country that's got a ginormous population. So,
The
and in
problem
some
is
ways
though,
more
it's a
links
lot
to
harder
Europe.
to, yeah, but I think it's a lot harder to put a division in Central America than it would be in Europe, though, just from a financial perspective.
I don't know. I was just in Mexico City. A city like that can handle it. I mean, and from a travel perspective, it's much easier.
Well, yeah, but if you could have Mexico City play Rio, that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, that starts to get
That's what I'm
long.
saying. So you
Yeah.
can't, unless you're going to have four teams in Mexico, sure. But you can't lump all of South America and
Right. The
Mexico.
difference between Mexico City and in Chile or Ecuador is significant.
Right. That's like essentially the same as flying
Yeah.
overseas for North America. So you'd have to, so maybe the long tail of it is if you really want to go 15 years in the future or more, the the South American division, the European division, it really becomes an international sport. And then
Yeah,
you
I think that's
hypothetically,
probably what they're seeing. Yeah. And there's just more money in Europe from an institutional standpoint where so that's why I was saying they're kind of force it a little bit more there because there's
well,
more
those are all first
wealth.
world countries
Yeah.
with wealth as opposed to not,
Right.
second world countries.
Um so fascinating. I've kind of just gotten over it because it's just like obviously it succeeded because they wouldn't be expanding this fast if it's not working or they don't see a path to it working. I don't love it, but it's not going away.
Well, I mean, my dislike of it is solely selfishly based on our requirement to cover Washington on the hog sty. Because we have done, like this year's schedule is like half of the games are nighttime and alternate schedule and stuff. I hate those because we have a lot to do on game days, and it's so much easier when we can do Sunday at 1 o'clock. We get everything done. At least we're not recording post game shows anymore. Thankfully, that was really bad because honest to God, Chris, I've recorded in the backyard. I've recorded in the garage. We've recorded at midnight many times. It's crazy. And so I'm just talking just selfishly for me. I'd much rather have every game I have to cover at 1 o'clock on a Sunday. So that's strictly what I don't care about anybody else but myself.
Well, that's not this season. It's
No,
coming
it's
up
definitely
season.
not. Oh, it's going to be here. I'm just dreading it.
Um, I do wonder. I mean, you can see the business move for the NFL. I still wonder if there's just at some point a ceiling on the international
I
appetite.
thought that from the beginning. That's where we started with this years ago was I think there is a ceiling on to me. The NFL is looked at as an American sport, and yeah, it may be a novelty act. It started out as a novelty act in London a little bit, but are they really into American football to the point where they could have franchises overseas? I still doubt it. That's what they're trying to find out.
Yeah. I think they, if I could give them, I still don't know where the ceiling is going to hit. What I will give the NFL credit for is that, they have taken a low and slow approach here and built it over, we're getting into
Nobody ever
probably
said the NFL wasn't smart.
right. And so they knew to do this, it was going to be a long game because and I think in London, they've probably, I've talked about this in the past. I've been randomly in London during NFL games and you can feel it. It's there. Like in a city that big. So I think in London they may have now gone past the tipping point where they actually are just building legitimate organic fans, but they knew that was going to be a 20 plus year project.
And that's what they've shown. I think fundamentally the real problem in like South America is that to really have like lifelong football fans, you have to have kids play the game. And that's really hard in countries that are poor. Like soccer is a cheap sport. That's why it's so popular in all around the world. Soccer is a cheap sport. All you need is a ball.
Yeah, and basketball too. Yeah.
Basketball, same thing. Football, you have to have gear, and it's an expensive. It's like baseball. I mean, baseball is an expensive sport to play, and it's
bigger rosters. Yeah,
yeah, and it has baseball's taken hold in Venezuela and certain spots. Granted, but football is the next level cost in logistics and effort to play, and so I think it's much more likely to become a thing in Europe. I think just because there's more money there but soccer is the king there. So the NFL's got a long road to hoe to beat out soccer anywhere.
And so you see so you can sort of see a different leg in this strategy for the NFL in their recent decision to allow potentially NFL players to be in the Olympic flag football. Because
can we stop right there?
Sure.
How freaking dumb is this? Flag football is an Olympic sport. I don't understand it in any capacity. I really, really don't. I mean, nor do I understand why the NFL would let players risk their health for this. Maybe it's what you're saying.
You answered your own question, because if they can actually make flag football a thing, which I'll tell you what, I go walk in the spring or fall in Prospect Park, which is the giant park in Brooklyn designed by the same architect that did Central Park. It's massive. There are flag football practices and games going on the whole time. So the NFL, if they can make flag football a thing, then that's the cheaper, everyone can play, no equipment version of youth football. So I think that is actually part of the strategy.
Well, let me modify what I'm saying. No, I think you're right. What I don't understand is where the teams are going to come from, and why like NFL coaching staffs would want their players to be allowed to do it. That's what I'm saying. Like you can't put a Swedish flag football team together. There is no such thing as a Swedish flag football team. You're going to get a bunch of rugby thugs. Are they going to divvy up every player in the NFL all around the world and put like the Viking
third generation
on the Thailand? Yeah, I mean, on the Thailand flag football team. I mean, how's it going to work?
I don't know, but I do think that is their how do you keep youth playing interest that will drive interest in the sport, and considering the concussions and all of that stuff. So I think you can overtly tell that they think that flag football is going to be a solution to the problem that you presented in terms of growing playing interest in the sport.
I don't know if it's the solution. It's one way to boost interest amongst younger people. Say it like that. I don't know if it's the solution. Certainly one of the solutions. My problem with it is, again, like the head coach of the Bears is not going to want Caleb Williams playing in the flag football league in the Olympics.
No, but he may not have a choice.
It may not be up to him. Yeah. True.
I saw there's some listen, I'm not tracking whatever quasi-professional leagues of flag football they are, but basically the star quarterback of flag football, who I'm not even going to remember his name, is like Ganush or Danush. It's American.
I was going to call him Kevin Thompson.
Sure. Said that it was saber rattling after the announcement that as good as Patrick Mahomes is, he wouldn't be a better flag football quarterback than him. So
what?
He doesn't know the nuances of the flag football sport like he does.
That's like saying I'm a better bedroom guitarist than Steve Vai. Yeah. I'm not. Newsflash.
So, but yeah, flag football is going to be
the intricacies of flag football. You gave me a laugh today, Chris. I appreciate it.
But listen, we just had all host countries, which is what's driving this, are allowed to put niche sports in. That's part of so that's the entryway. That's the kind of
I guess we should have said that, because the Olympics are in
LA,
Los Angeles, right?
Yeah. So there's home country prerogative. Thus why we had that, abomination.
I just think the flag football game's going to end when Patrick Mahomes launches the ball 60 yards downfield and that other kid
They should
throws it
almost let
30.
America like field 4 teams, right? They should almost like divide the country into regions just for the sake of that.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, who's going to be on, the Chile flag football team?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's going to be remixed soccer players and remixed rugby
Yeah,
players.
right. That's exactly right. Get a bunch of rugby thugs out there that, they can do it, I guess, but they're not going to compete with the starting wide receiver core of the Atlanta Falcons.
No, but we're
Jamar Chase out there covered by some flag football guy.
but youth
Good
flag
luck.
football is on the rise, so
It
that'll be an
is.
interesting trend in the United States.
Yeah. In the US, but they don't need more interest in the US. This is to get international interest. We have enough interest in the US.
Yeah, I think what they're worried in a U.S. context, what they are worried about is there's just, I mean, a lot of kids aren't even playing organized football until they
I think
get
a lot of
to high
parents are
school.
a lot of parents are more nervous about it, I
Yeah,
think, than before because of the concussion lawsuit and all of that.
so they need youth leagues that in the United States too, right? Because you can't over decades you can't lose. You're so right in terms of like you can't lose kids playing it in terms of like regenerating your sport. That is essential.
Yeah, I mean, one of my kids played a season of flag football and dumped it for baseball. And because he got hurt in flag football, hurt a knee, and it hurt him in baseball, and so I think there's a lot of that. That's the fear, sort of generally.
So keep watching that. International, and of course now the Commanders they're not their first one, right? They had that weird tie in with the Bengals in London one
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah. Whenever a bunch of people missed kicks, if I
Yeah,
recall.
right. Yeah. So
Everybody, all the Washington fans conveniently forget that the Bengals kicker missed the game-winning kick also.
yeah, that was just a weird game. But they'll be in Madrid this coming. I think this is the second year in Madrid, maybe the third. But they'll be the Madrid team, the Commanders.
And yeah, thanks a lot, NFL, for caring about your media.
Oh yeah, the media is way down on the chart of things that they care about because they.
By
know
the way,
that.
before I forget, speaking of, the Hogsty site got selected by FeedSpot as one of the top Washington football blogs. So thanks very much for that. And check out you can Google FeedSpot Washington Redskins blogs because they still use the name Redskins, which I also applaud. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, congratulations, Hawkeye.
We paid him.
So
No,
we'll go yeah. We'll go even nerd. We're pretty well. Like I said, we were scraping the barrel for stories, and we've gone pretty nerdy when we, with capital investments and international
About to get
expansion.
far nerdier now.
Yeah. So, NIL, which we've been talking about forever, but is here to stay in some form, but probably with new rules on its way as early as later on this summer. But we are looking at and we found this, I believe.
Yahoo Finance.
Yes.
Which is really the nerdiest thing we've possibly ever.
Yeah.
No, actually, this is actually from it was
New,
linked by Yahoo Finance. It's actually something called New Media Wire.
right. A new piece of software from Fintech company Roy, but the particular software tool is called the NILVault, which they are now looking to sell to college sports. Basically, this creates, for lack of a better term, a monitoring system for compliance and tracking so that if you are a college athlete at any level who is going to be taking NIL money, you would have to, I think, probably be mandated, right? This would probably be something if they actually do sign this contract and this becomes a piece of software that manages college NIL, then part of your process would be, hey, the local car wash wants to pay me 3 times to come out or whatever. You'd register your bank account. This software would then interact and basically it's essentially an piece of accounting software, really, that then collects, tracks, and updates the amount of NIL money to an individual athlete that then gives the college a dashboard to see and track and then have records for their own compliance, which is going to be coming soon, about how much payout, everything from everything from, kind of a low level like wrestler that does the car wash circuit to the women volleyball player who's starting to bring in more and more money with endorsements and whatnot, to the top echelon of college basketball and college football. And so if you're Duke University, this NIL Vault would then allow you to log in and have a dashboard, a running record of every athlete in your system tracking their NIL revenue. And then probably you'd be able to bundle all that into a bunch of reports that you would then turn in for your compliance when that comes down here with the result of this House v. NCAA ruling and the new tracking and compliance rules that will come with NIL.
Yeah. So, first of all, this is uncredited except New Media Wire, dated May 13th. There's not an author to it, but let me give you an analogy to this. So, if somebody opens their own little local Mexican restaurant, those people might be using an Excel spreadsheet to track business stuff. If they don't know what they're doing, they just know they have mom's taco recipes or whatever, and they don't really know how to do it. Wherein if you go instead to Taco Bell, they have massive linked, highly developed business software. Okay. And there's a massive difference between an Excel spreadsheet and really business software. So NCAA teams are at the Excel spreadsheet level. They don't know how to do this. They're just now bringing people in who know how to do business stuff. So this software, this NIL Vault, is going to be the massive software that Taco Bell uses versus your local Mexican restaurant using Excel spreadsheet. That is where we're going with this. This is something they really need. There's potential in this NIL for a massive amount of problems and corruption, and they need software like this. Universities need software like this to properly manage their business, because much like NFL teams, there is now a payroll. And there are now business issues that they have to do. They're not a university team anymore. They're a professional sports franchise. So I think this is only the first one of these. There's going to be more of these. I've never heard of Roy before, but I'm surprised it's taken this long for somebody to come up with some stuff with this. I think it's desperately, desperately needed. And there's a lot of interesting details about this. It's designed to like flag any. It's designed to apparently link athletes' bank accounts to the software, so it'll automatically monitor and flag anything over $600. And it's supposed to create tailored dashboards and position group earnings, and it is really, really detailed. Again, this, you got to think, massive international chain versus local restaurant. That is what we're graduating to with this. So Roy's apparently launched in 2024 by somebody called Cale Johnston, who's describing this as a serial entrepreneur. So that may mean he's formed a bunch of things that haven't worked.
Well, he sold basically, I think he had one company that at least
ClickSwitch.
Yeah, which at least I think sold to a major finance company or something. So so I think he's basically flipping whatever, the money that he sold that company for into Roy.
Basically, and that's what that's why they call him a serial entrepreneur.
Right.
Typically,
you're just trying to grow something big enough to be sold.
Yes. There's very few people who keep these companies and maintain them for life. And there's a handful of them, like Chick-fil-A is one of them, for example. But most of these guys are just trying to grow them and flip them, and they start again. And that's what this Roy Johnston guy is. So I think you're going to see competition to this. I'm sure there's many other companies that are working on the same thing here. Desperately, desperately needed. Because as we said before, the NCAA, through their own stupidity, have created a very difficult situation. And this is one way to help.
Yeah, and if this works and this solves an immediate problem, which I imagine it will, I mean, think of all the universities, big, small, medium, and large, and you suddenly, this could turn into for Roy, which is the parent company of NILVault, this could turn into what? 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 contracts across the country, right? Because I don't care if it's Slippery Rock, Notre Dame, or the University of Georgia. If this solves a problem, they'll pick up contracts with all of them. And what, to me, a big sign for that is that the basically the amount is only $600. That means that they see as much value to the Slippery Rock scenario because of that low NIL amount ping, right? Like that's a small amount in the
Well,
world of
that's the amount.
NIL.
Like, you know, the star center fielder at Slippery Rock's going to have a car wash contract.
Right. So
in
that
Midtown.
means that the fact that the minimum starts there means that their sales pitch is that they're looking to pick up all contracts across all of the different sizes of ecosystems in college sports.
Well, I would point out that this column states that $600 is not a made up number. So apparently that is the reporting threshold.
Right.
It's
But that'll
$600.
go with the upcoming compliance. Right.
Yeah, they didn't just make it up. And so, right. And so, for those of you who don't know, by the way, the House settlement he's talking about is a lawsuit. It's House v. NCAA, I believe. And that is the lawsuit that's generated. That's the impetus behind a lot of these rule changes is that lawsuit. And because there's been many lawsuits over the years, that's just finally the one that's stuck.
But if they saw, like, you could imagine Roy, the company, saying, "Listen, we don't care. Like, we're not a solution for the small. We understand that the compliance law is $600, but our target market is the larger universities, and so we're going to set it at 10,000 or whatever. But the fact that they are matching the floor requirement shows that they're going to be marketing to Slippery Rock just as long as well to Notre Dame.
Well, it's just a data point. I mean, they could change the number to 5 cents if they wanted to. The point is the system will work for everybody.
Yeah, and they'll sell their services
Because Ohio State's going to have, the backup center is going to maybe have a car wash contract.
Yeah.
Not everybody's Caleb Williams.
There'll probably be almost like a seat license type of pricing plan for the universities, right? Like,
Probably. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
something along those lines. Yeah. So
Because most of these companies do have those. They have monthly license fees you have to pay. You don't just buy software at that level anymore. Your company, like my company, has this problem. They have to buy a certain number of licenses for the software. They actually, like, for example, last week they accidentally let something expire, and everybody and the whole
couldn't
business
get access.
got a notice that said you're going to run out of access in 7 days. And we got to renew it.
No, it should be. I have to give them credit. This was a smart play, and they're early into the market,
Yep.
and they could easily become the provider here in a short amount of time, because this is going to solve a problem. Because what's interesting is we can debate the level of quasi connection and with the big booster clubs and the nonprofits, of course, but technically the universities aren't paying any of this money. Right? They may be directing money through these big collaboratives and stuff at the high levels, but this really is one of the reasons you need this level of management software is because you really are talking about three key players, right? The athlete, the university that they play for, and this whole ecosystem of people who may or may not be
Which
paying.
is these
And that's
NIL collectives that are associated with the university, but they're really the boosters, but
they have to be treated
technically
as a third entity or second entity. So this software helps to basically keep track of those three key stakeholders.
Because it's become the job of the university to monitor this, to basically monitor.
Yeah, their ass is on the line if something goes wrong.
Because if it goes wrong, they're going to be the ones that will be sanctioned by the NCAA. So they have an obligation to do this, and that's where this software comes in. Hypothetically, you would say, if you wanted to, you could say, well, these collectives aren't our problem. The University of Georgia collective has nothing to do with the athletic department, but because they're obligated under NCAA rules to ensure that it's done properly, and if it's not, they're going to get sanctioned. They have to do this, and this is where the software comes in.
Yeah. So smart play by Roy with this. I imagine, there'll be more players in this, and there's also more places where this software doesn't even particularly try to solve. So there'll be probably more opportunities. But I have to give them credit. They were
these guys are
forward thinking.
Yeah, because this thought had never occurred to me before we read this story.
No, I think I first saw it as like a little. I think maybe in like Sportico or something, where it was a nugget. It was just like a bullet point. Oh, here's like a long tail of like mergers and acquisitions in sports business. And then I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So then I just Googled that, and that's where I got to the story that we're referencing. But
and just to show you how like small this company is. So the guy behind this, his name is Cale Johnson. He's the guy behind Roy, but they list the contact At the bottom of the story is Lindsay Johnston, Lindsay at joinroy.com. And so that's clearly a family member, sister, wife, mother, whoever it is, but that's small enough to where he's the face of it. And this female family member is the principal contact of the company. So this is a very small company.
And this is not and it's not a difficult engineering problem, right? Like it's just basically databasing and accounting software.
Right.
Right. So like it's not, it's not like you're, I'm sure you had to pay something for obviously the people to build it, but this is not like a hard, engineering problem.
Well, eventually, like, who's the people behind TurboTax? I mean, those companies are going to probably steal this idea and do their own.
Right.
Or into it.
They'll buy Roy. That's probably what.
Yeah. Or Microsoft. Microsoft is famous for buying out companies and stealing the product and squashing the company out of existence. Microsoft's done that for a generation.
Yeah.
More.
Bye Skype is
yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Microsoft. It's now costing us $50 a year.
So there you go. No, I think it's we got some nerdy stories, but all of these are like little stories that probably are just like kind of down the chain in terms of importance. But if you watch these, these are growers, so to speak. All three, right? The international expansion of the NFL, the now sort of organized and coordinated entry of private equity firms into sports as an overt investment portfolio, and now what will be the new software and business practices that as we formalize NIL.
Let's be honest, you guys aren't listening to us to get non-nerdy stories, okay? Yeah, right. If you're a regular fan of ours, you're into nerdy stories.
Yeah, well, we went even deeper for you, but but it's super fascinating because these are the things that are that everyone will be talking about soon enough, I think.
And now that we're at the end of the show, I'd like to thank my dog here for sleeping.
Only one bark.
Yeah, sleeping through the majority of the episode. He's right here by my feet, and so I appreciate that, dog.
There you go. So, Steve, you kind of gave some hints, but what is going on in Hog-Style land?
We are in the heart of our position group breakdown series, which is my effort to fill some time in the dead zone in May and June by analyzing, now that free agency and the draft is over, really analyzing in detail where Washington lies in position groups. And so we do that in writing, which you can read a new written story almost every day. And plus the Hog-Style podcast is released every Thursday. And we'll be doing that until training camp starts. And then we'll get into training camp. We will see about credentials. I don't know if we're going to be back yet. I still have to talk my way back into the good graces of the new Washington management about that, but we'll see.
Well, you can use your feed. What was it? Feed. What was the name of the company that cited the site?
FeedSpot.
FeedSpot. Well, you can cite the FeedSpot accolades there.
That's sure to get us. In.
I'll give a Commander's prediction people can track between now and July or August 1st. Javarius Clowney will be a Commander, but he will sign within hours of training camp beginning because none of these older veterans are going to want to have to like slog through mini camp. So I predict Clowney will be on the roster by August 15th.
Is Jadarius Clowney the redheaded stepchild, like younger brother of Jadeveon Clowney? Or
whatever. I can't read. Jay Clowney. How about that?
Okay, fair enough. Jadarius Clowney is probably more likely than Jadeveon Clowney.
But there you go. He will be
They need a pass rusher. 15th. Either way, they need a pass rusher.
But all these old pass rushers, none of them are going to sign when they have to deal with mini camps in front of them.
They hate. What I've learned is NFL players hate OTAs and
yeah. So like if you've got if you know you're going to get 10 million for a year and you're in shape, you just wait till camp.
The new guys love it. The old guys are like, oh my God, another one.
Yeah. So there you go. All right, Steve, and we will see you in 2 weeks.